Hello everybody, my name is Anthony Budd, and today I'm going to be giving a brief overview on my project, the Express.ts API template. Now this project basically contains all of the functionality that pretty much every SaaS application is going to need. That's things like login, sign up, and password reset, but also things like users, groups, and roles within those groups. This is a production-ready code base. I started off at LegalZoom about 8 years ago, and I spun it out into its own open source project. And it's also very much real-world tested. I've implemented this code base at probably 6 or 7 different startups that I've been the primary developer for. And this project has handled well over $50 million of live customer transactions. So to get started with the application, we're just going to go ahead and clone that repository. I'm going to do this in the temp directory for now. And we will then create a project. Excellent. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly explain how to set up the project and how to get going. So we've done the git clone, we've seeded into that directory. This command here is going to basically do a find and replace in your application. This is to rename all the variables, all the container names, that kind of stuff. And we're going to just change this to Anthony B API demo. Then we're going to need a public and private key for JWT signing. You can see they're there. They're also get ignored by default. We're going to copy the m.example.env. We're going to do an npm install. Now, you will see that there's 2 low severity vulnerabilities. That's because Mocha is using a vulnerable or has a small vulnerability for JS parsing. However, Mocha is a dev dependency, so you won't be using that. You won't be using that in production. Next, we're going to go to Docker Compose up. Now it's going to actually build the Node24 container for the actual backend API, and it's also going to create another container which is a MySQL DB. And this is where we're going to persist all of the kind of application data. Great, so it looks like those containers were built correctly. You can see that the MySQL DB is now initializing. And you can see it's all been prefixed with the API name that we just updated. And you can now see that the Node24 container has successfully started. It's listening on port 80, and it's connected to the DB. If we make a new terminal window here, and I'm going to run the command npm run exec db refresh. A lot of people ask me why do I prefix it with exec. The reason for this is because we want that command to run inside the container. So for pretty much every command db refresh, there's another one called exec, or it's prefixed with exec. What this will do is it will run this command above, but it just prefixes it with docker exec ti. So that's ran that command inside the container. If we go over to table plus, we can then see that we've now created all of the tables that we need, users, groups, users, and it's also seeded those with some example users and groups. Next part of the setup to confirm that the setup went well, I was just going to run the command npm run exec test. Now this will run all those Mocha tests. There's about 35 of them, and this just confirms that everything's set up and working. And great, looks like we're all completely passing. I'll just do a brief overview of the code base, the actual structure of the repository. database or SRC database contains all of the migrations, which is where we define the database structure. Seeders is all of the data that we're going to seed into that database. Emails are your HTML email templates. This is where these are the emails that we send from our backend API to the customers, the clients. Models is where we define all of the models in our database. We're using Sequelize as the ORM. I'm not a really big fan of Prism. Providers is kind of a catch-all really for this is a database connector itself. There's a few helper functions like generate JWT and all that kind of stuff. So provider is kind of like a free-for-all directory really. Routes is where we define all of the HTTP endpoints. As you can see, this is the auth endpoint. This is for logging in, and this is where we actually check the user's password MFA if they've provided it. You'll also see as well that all of the routes and lots of other of the models are prefixed with these Swagger comments. What this does is there is a command called npm run generate open API spec, and that will generate a fresh open API spec based on these comments. I've found that when you're working on large teams in prod, it's much easier to define the Swagger or the Swagger route definition right next to the actual route code itself, rather than trying to maintain some kind of like static open API spec file. That doesn't seem to work in my experience. And that is basically the setup of the application. We can actually go to localhost /API v1 health check, and we can now see that is actually responding to HTTP requests, as we can see here. So I hope that tutorial was kind of valuable for you. If you are planning on using this, if you do run into any issues, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or create a issue on GitHub. And I hope you find that well. Thank you.